Great to be working with you again. So welcome everyone to this Microsoft Reactor session on getting started with Vue. And so, Vue is a very, very cool topic. It's a very, very cool framework. It's very, very current. There's a lot of utilization of Vue right now, and we're going to talk about probably some of the reasons why that is. It's very lightweight and easy to integrate, but it also provides you the ability to do much, much more sophisticated things with it as well. So we're going to be, if you imagine a topic like Vue being this big, we're going to really be beginning that journey today, right? We're going to be starting or getting started, as the title says, right, with Vue, sort of right from the ground up. And then the idea would be that we would build a strong foundation, a strong basis around the fundamentals, and then that we could continue that journey of learning with this particular language as we go, or framework as we go. Along those same lines, there are going to be a couple of different upcoming Reactor sessions that have Vue-related components to them as well. So if you like this one and you're sort of starting that journey in Vue today, in addition to continuing that journey yourself, which I'm hoping you get some good tools and foundation to do so, those upcoming sessions will be great ways to, kind of continue pushing forward as well. So great to have you here. Great to be here with you. Welcome, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. So the reactors, maybe this is your first one. Maybe you've been coming, every week for the last year. But reactors, I think they are an awesome thing to take advantage of. I think they're an excellent opportunity. And the reason I like them is because it allows us, right, community members, to come together and learn from one another. Technology is really, really fun. Being in technology, solving technology problems, there's always a new problem to solve. That's what makes this interesting and exciting. But, it can be a little hard to stay ahead of the curve too. So facilities like the reactors give us a chance to meet with one another, come together, learn from one another's experience and expertise, and really, as a community, grow even stronger together. So it's great to have you here. And I think you've made a really, really good decision to be a part of the Reactors program, because it is really dynamite from my perspective. Part of what makes it great is the fact that there are, sessions offered all over the world. I think we're nearing the place where we might be able to start meeting again in person, at least on a limited basis. So that's great. In between that time, sessions like this where we're able to connect virtually from all over the world. I'm currently in Columbus, Ohio. In the States, and so being able to connect from with people all over the globe, and again learn from many others and many others' experience is a great aspect of this program as well. Code of conduct. So just some things to kind of keep in mind, and these are very, very common sense. But learning takes patience, right? It takes patience with yourself, takes patience with others. So, as we proceed in this journey, over the course of the next 60 minutes, kind of take these things to heart. Again, very, very common sense things, but being aware of each other, being friendly and patient, we'll be welcoming and respectful. We'll be open to all questions and viewpoints, be understanding of differences, and then be kind and considerate to others. And that's, pretty common sense stuff. But what we want this to be is an inclusive and an inviting environment for learning. Along the lines of being open to all questions and viewpoints, as Maria mentioned, I love when people, ask questions as they come up and as we proceed through the materials. I have two different screens up, right? So I'm able to watch questions on one side while I present from the other screen. So definitely, definitely feel free, if you have a question, to drop it in the chat. If it's contextually relevant to what we're talking about, I will likely address it right away. If it maybe is more relevant to something we're going to cover in a few minutes, I'll say that's a great question. Maybe just hold that and we'll come back to it. But as Maria said, which I like the way she put it, we are trying to make this session as interactive as we can, given the fact that we are several miles separated from one another. But I definitely want you to feel like you can ask questions. I don't know all the answers. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you. If I do know the answer, I'll do my best to provide it to you. But that's how we learn, right, is asking questions. So definitely feel free to do that. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and, kind of the administrative upfront stuff is, I think, covered. Let's go ahead and get started with the material. So getting started with Vue. A little bit about me. My name is Alan Sanders. I'm a principal cloud architect, software engineer. This whole gobbledygook of text right here basically says that I've been doing this for a really long time. That's why my beard is so white. I've been in architecture, development, and design for about 25 plus years. I've worked in several large verticals like finance and insurance, manufacturing. I've worked for some smaller consulting companies. I've done some stuff on my own. I've done quite a bit of teaching. But that last sort of sentence there is the thing that's most important to me, for me, in my opinion, for you to know, is that I'm very, very passionate about learning. My own learning and others learning as well. So very important to me. That's why I do this. That's why I think this is such an awesome opportunity, is because we can learn things, right? We can really build out our knowledge of technology and, help one another stay ahead of that technological curve where possible. Okay. Moria has posted some links. Thank you for doing that, Moria. There are a few things there. One of them is going to be the link to the Microsoft Learn module that we are going to be covering off on today, or sort of using as our framework for what we talk about. There's some other Vue-related links, and then the last link that she provided was a link to a GitHub repository that I have made available, within which you'll find these slides, right? So as we proceed, maybe if you missed part of what we're talking about today, or just want to go back and kind of review it, once it's the recording is pushed to the Microsoft YouTube channel, you can listen there, use the Microsoft Learn links, and then maybe use these slides to help you revisit and continue to deepen your knowledge and understanding of the topic. Okay. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes for me, especially if it's a topic I'm not familiar with, if I can go through it a couple of times and really get some hands-on practice, that helps. We are going to have opportunities to sort of for you to sort of code along if you want, or you can watch what I'm doing and then feel free to revisit after the fact as well. All right. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk quick introduction, and then we're going to answer that question, right? A pretty relevant question, I think, at least depending on where you're coming at from this topic. What is Vue.js, right? What is this framework? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to look at, creating an app using Vue. So we'll kind of play around with Vue and understand, again, from the core fundamentals perspective, how do we stand up or start a Vue application, right? And it's actually very, very easy to do. We'll see that it's easy to do today. And then over the course of the next couple of sessions, we'll have a chance to build on that, right? We're going to talk attribute binding. So there's, data binding relative to element attributes. There's class binding and style binding that we'll have a chance to sort of cover off on as well. Depending on where we land with time, there's a knowledge check that we can, look into to sort of wrap everything up. And then we'll come back together for a summary prior to ending the session. So let's go ahead and get rolling with the introduction. And what you can do is hit this link, aka.ms/getstartedvue. I'm going to open that up. It's over here on a different screen. So let me launch or pull that up. Make sure I keep the questions in front of me. Let me increase the size here. So this is Microsoft Learn, which I don't know if you have. Also, there's a check-in link that is available. I don't know if that's up and working, but you might try hitting that as well. So this Microsoft Learn platform is really awesome. It's another, I think, beneficial offering when it comes to kind of our own professional development. The reason I think it's great is there are multiple modules. Those modules include learning units. And in my opinion, it does a really, really good job of combining documentation and links to other documentation with hands-on exercises, right? So again, one of the ways that I learn well when I'm trying to learn a technology, especially, is being able to sort of bang on the keyboard at the same time and try things, right? That's a great way to learn. The Microsoft Learn, sort of platform supports that, and it's built right into the platform. And as far as topics are concerned, pretty much any topic in technology, it seems, you can find a module on. We can, as we proceed through this, we can earn experience points, and then we can use those experience points to, earn trophies, and it's kind of a fun way to kind of track our learning. So we're going to be walking through this. Now, we're not obviously going to be reading this line by line because that would be boring. The slides I have are going to sort of distill this information into kind of a few slides. A lot of what we're going to be doing today is coding, but definitely want you to have this so that you can refer along, follow along, and then go back and review after the fact as well. Okay. Let me get back to my presentation here. So what are our objectives? Our objectives are really to understand and get some exposure to the core concepts of Vue, right? So what does that look like from the ground up? We're gonna use Vue to create a web-based app that displays some reactive data. And then we're going to look at data binding and style class binding, which is one form of a way that we can make our pages more dynamic. Vue, allows us to build a model through many different mechanisms. We could be building that model by coding it directly. We could be building that model using results that we get back from an API call. We can build this data model, and then we can bind elements of our pages to that data model. And then Vue will watch for changes to that model. And as changes occur to those properties within the model, the page will dynamically update. Vue will watch for those changes and dynamically update. And so what it leads to is a very, very rich web experience, right? And that's what, in terms of success of web pages, I think one of the biggest sort of tells of that or measures of that is the user experience, right? Do people find your site easy to use? Do people find your site to be dynamic? Does it almost feel like I'm not in a web page, I'm in an application that's installed on my system? Technologies like Vue help us to make it feel that way so that it's very, very responsive. Certain subsections of that application can change dynamically. It leads us to topics and considerations of things like single page applications, where instead of the full page updating, we just have spots within the page that dynamically updates as we proceed and act on our applications. So this data binding that Vue supports is going to be very, very critical to that capability. Now, you may have some experience or have at least heard of other frameworks like Angular. Angular is another big one, right? It's a very, very similar concept in terms of data binding and being able to do dynamic updates. There's the difference with Vue, I think, is maybe it's a little lighter weight, but it gives you a little bit lower barrier of entry, but it still provides you a lot of power to do a lot of really interesting things. So let's talk about that a little bit as we go. Prerequisite-wise, we're going to be using HTML and CSS. Vue is a JavaScript-based framework, so having JavaScript experience would be beneficial as well. And then software-wise, we're going to, in one of the sort of coding exercises we do, we're going to use Git so that we can pull down a repository as a starting point. We're going to look at Visual Studio Code as in a developer IDE or integrated development environment. And then you can refer to Vue.js.org for additional info about the framework. Again, as we're proceeding here, definitely feel free to post questions. We haven't really gotten into the material yet, so may not be any questions yet, but feel free to post those questions as we go, or comments even, and we can interact throughout the presentation. So usage options. Vue has a CLI, or a command line interface, that we can leverage, and we can leverage it for building out full Vue projects. In fact, one of the upcoming Reactor sessions is going to talk about the CLI. We can, pull that framework down using NPM. Or one of the options we have is to simply plug it into a page using a script tag, referencing a CDN, or content delivery network location, where the latest version of the framework is stored. And so that is one of the things that makes Vue, I think, great, is there are multiple options for pulling it into your application. For this session, we're going to be focusing on the script tag, the embedding the script tag within our page. And then, as we have additional sessions, we'll continue to build out from there. But what we'll really do by doing that is focusing specifically on what the starting blocks of an application in Vue looks like. But there are multiple usage options available with the framework, and that's one of the things that I think makes it great. All right, so let's go ahead and keep rolling. All right, so what is this thing called Vue.js? It's an open source, progressive JavaScript-based framework, and we're talking about what I mean by progressive here in a minute. It was created by Evan You, and it was first released in 2014. And when I say progressive here, I mean that it is lightweight, and it's easy to integrate, and then it's easy to build out from there, right? So with Vue, I think it allows you to decide which sections of your application that you would like to use Vue within, right? You can integrate it very easily in those sections and then expand from there. That's what I mean by progressive, right? You can start small, right, in one specific area, and then basically build out from in complexity going forward. So definitely as we proceed here, we'll have a chance to see that there are ways to just start small and grow from there, and that's what we mean by progressive framework. It focuses on the view layer, right? So it really focuses on our pages, on our displays, on the user interface. It's going to use custom HTML attributes, or what are also known as directives, for connecting our view or our pages to our data model. And one of the things that's also beneficial is it's component-based, right? So we can capture elements of an interface in components, and then we can compose those smaller components into larger, more full-featured interfaces, which is nice, right? Because if we can componentize some of these things, it gives us a couple of benefits. One is that it gives us reuse, right? If I have a control that has some interesting properties and capabilities built into it, it might be that I have multiple opportunities to use that. So instead of having to repeat that code everywhere, I can wrap it up in a component and then pull that component into other pages where I need it. The other thing that does is it helps to keep our page code smaller, right? Instead of one large, set of code to define the entire page, instead we have modules that are plugged in, which each of the modules then individually would be smaller, but we still have the benefit of building them out and composing them into something more interesting. So that composition is huge. If you've used React or Angular, it's the same kind of concept. You'll find the same concepts there as well. Okay. It uses reactive binding for a dynamic web experience. So, as I mentioned, we will have an app that sits in the background, right? From that app, we will have the ability to return a data model. That data model will have properties, and we can bind our HTML elements or attributes of them to those model properties and get automatic updates, right? Get automatic display of the current values and refresh as those model values change. So there's that, that transfer of data between, and there's also the ability, we talked about that composition architecture. With Vue, there's the ability to transfer properties between components, because if you imagine we have a parent component that contains multiple children, we might need to, from the parent, pass information into the children. We might need to pass information from one child to another. There are facilities to do that via properties. And, there are several built-in directives that are available within the framework, but there's also support for custom directives as well, which can really help because, as we proceed, we can add a capability that's maybe not currently in the framework. We can use the framework to build out that capability and then have it available going forward. Okay. So here's the basic flow, at least when we're talking about the approach that we are taking for this session, which is to, add a script tag referencing the Vue framework. Here's what the basic flow is going to look like. Right? We're going to add Vue.js to the page. We're going to then create an app. And when I say an app, I mean an app object that is Vue-based, right? That app object is going to likely include a data method, which returns another object that has multiple properties that we might want to bind our interface to. We then mount the app, which means we associate the Vue app object with some, element, sort of root element or parent element on the page as a target for our bound content. And then we display the bound data. Okay, so that's what we're kind of gonna be walking through as we proceed. So let's go ahead and look at what that kind of looks like. So let me bring this up. And so I'm going to start clicking through the Microsoft Learn module. We started introduction. All right, so let's talk. We're going to sort of be picking up right here. Pardon me. What we're going to want to do is I'm going to use anyway Visual Studio Code. So if you don't have Visual Studio Code, it's very easy to get it. If you go to your browser and type download VS Code, you should be able to find a link fairly quickly by which you can actually download and install the IDE. One of the great things about VS Code is it is cross-platform. So there are, implementations that run in Windows, on Mac OS, and on Linux. So that's, one of the things that I think also makes it a pretty cool application. The other thing that's pretty interesting about VS Code, from my perspective, is it supports a ton of extensions, and those are plugins that we can add to the tool to improve developer experience depending on the language, and it supports just about any language, right? So there are extensions for Angular, extensions for Vue, extensions for TypeScript that give us things like linters and IntelliSense. There are extensions for Docker and Kubernetes that allow us to, rather than needing to interact with the CLI to look at containers we have in Docker, we can get that information in a graphical format. So there's just a ton of extensions that can be added to the IDE to make it, even a better, user developer experience. I'm sorry, a better developer experience, depending on the language that you are working in. So I'm also going to be using WSL, or Windows Subsystem for Linux. Oops, not that one. This up a little bit. So WSL, if you don't have experience with it, Windows Subsystem for Linux, it's pretty cool from my perspective. You can, using it, you can actually run a full Linux distribution within Windows 10. So I'm on a Windows 10 machine, but I am running a full 20.04 distribution of Ubuntu on my machine. So that's what you're seeing here, is that Linux terminal, or that bash shell. Why not use VS Code terminal? Absolutely. So Elwin said, why not just use the VS Code terminal? You're absolutely right, and we'll actually have a chance to use that. I'm just using this to kind of get me started, and I'm trying to show a way to go from this shell into VS Code. But you're absolutely correct. I could use the VS Code terminal to do a lot of these same things. So I'm going to make a new directory here called Vue React. Actually, I'm going to navigate instead to where I typically keep my repositories or my source code. And now I'm going to make a directory called Vue-Reactor. I can then cd into that new folder. And when you have VS Code installed, when I'm in a folder that I want to operate against, I can type code dot, and that will launch VS Code. And let me increase the view here a little bit, make it easier to read. So to Elwin's point and what was raised there is a full bash terminal that is integrated within VS Code, and that we will likely use, or that you will likely make use of often when you're developing with the tool. So very, very good call out. We'll have a chance even to use that here today. Okay, so let's go ahead and here I'm going to get rid of this window, and I'm just going to create a new HTML file. This is going to be pretty straightforward at this point. It's going to have a head element with a title. It's then going to have a body, and then we'll start to add some additional items to that. Let me release our, okay. Okay, so when we want to use Vue, one of the easiest ways to do it is to use a script tag. So and this is out in the Microsoft Learn module. I'm just going to copy this and paste this here within the head section. And this is going to allow us to go out to what's called a CDN, or Content Delivery Network, which provides basically file access capabilities all over the world, geographically closer to where you are. There's redundancy built in, and it gives us the ability to pull in this framework just by adding this script tag. Okay, so we can do that. That's, it's that easy, right? And that's what I mean by progressive. There are more complicated and complex ways that you can make use of Vue, and will likely make use of Vue as you proceed in your learning and utilization. But it really is this easy to just plug it in. Okay. So kind of following along with that diagram that showed the flow, the next thing we'll do, I'm going to actually make sure I save this. If this shows a white circle, it means it's not saved yet. So Control S or Command S, if you're on a Mac, will be the shortcut key for saving the current file. So the next thing we're going to do is add a file called index.js. And within the index.js file, we're going to create our Vue app object. And so we're going to use const. Const is a way to declare a variable that can only be changed on initial declaration, right? It can only be set, I should say, on initial definition or declaration. So at the time of declaration, I'm going to initialize this variable. And from that point forward, I won't be able to change this variable to point to a different object. Now, I can make changes to the underlying pieces of it, but I can't make changes to the top level object itself. So const app equals Vue.createApp. And then we're going to have this object that includes methods that we will utilize or can utilize within our Vue application. Okay, so that's the app creation within Vue. The next thing we'll want to do is a very, very common method that you will use with a Vue app is the data method. And by leveraging these names, then that's what sort of ties us together so that Vue can automatically do what we need it to do or want it to do as it's processing. From this data method, we will return a new object. And this new object is going to contain the properties that we want to display or bind to for our interface. Okay. So as an example, we could include in here a first name, and I'll use mine. You could use yours if you're following along. Let me move that so you can see a last name. Whoa. All right. So that's our Vue object, our Vue app object using, we created using Vue.createApp. We defined a data method, and from that data method, we returned an object that had possibly properties that we want to bind to. All right. So the next thing we'll want to do is integrate this into our HTML page. And so here at the body, at the bottom of our body, we can add a new script tag that pulls in our index.js. And then we're going to have an additional script tag here that will mount our Vue app object to some element on the page. Okay. And that element is going to end up being, in this case, a div. Right. So what we've done is we've pulled in our index.js, which defines our Vue object. Our Vue object defines a data method, and that data method returns an object of properties, and could be an object of objects as well, which we'll look at here shortly. And then we mount that application object to something within the page, often a div by ID. That's what the hash or number sign means, is it's selecting or identifying or locating an element by ID. So we're mounting to the app ID. And then what we're able to do is add statements that will display our data dynamically, that will take the data defined in the model. This is our model, right? Our data model. It'll take that data and automatically update the page with it if we code it to do so. And the way we code it to do so is using, or one option anyway, is to use handlebar syntax. So if I do double curly brace, I can do last name, comma, double curly brace, first name. And that's all it takes to do a Vue app. Now, obviously, the Vue app doesn't do much, right? All we're doing is displaying a first name and a last name. But the foundation, the fundamentals around pulling the framework in, creating an app object, setting up your data model, mounting that app to your page, and then displaying properties, that's all represented here in just a few lines of code. So to verify that this is working the way we would expect, down here in the terminal, as Ellen mentioned, I can So what you could do is, in your file explorer, you could find the index.html page and double click that. If you're in Windows Subsystem for Linux, one of the things you can do is type WSL Vue, and then I can run index.html. And that should launch the page, which is on a different screen. Let me pull that over. Oops. And let me increase the size. So there, again, we haven't done much, right? There's not a whole lot of exciting activity going on, but the foundation, the framework of how Vue operates is represented in this example. If I go to developer tools, pull this up a little larger, you'll see here that it's showing that we're running Vue, right? You were running a development build of Vue. The script tag that we have used is going to be for a development version. The recommendation, right, is if you were going to go to production, that you would use a production version, because the production version is going to be bundled and minified, which makes for a smaller footprint for your application. So, if we were going to production, we would likely use a different version. And, when we, from a deployment perspective, we can have environment variables, environment configurations that allow us to, vary which link or which instance we're pointing to when the page runs. But for our purposes, our learning purposes relative to Vue, this is what we, this is what we're using. We're using the development version. And if I open this up and inspect this element, you see here this data V app. That's like the only thing that really indicates this is a Vue application. The Sanders out, there's no handlebars, right? It's just, Sanders Allen, whatever that text is. It looks like I built the page and hard coded that text in there, but I didn't, right? What I did was I used, if I can get back to it, I used dynamic, controls. I used handlebars syntax to bind my view, or what we're looking at, the elements, to the underlying data model. So any questions or comments, certainly feel free to raise those as we're proceeding. But let's look at another example, okay? So following along with, anything's open, following along here, right? We kind of walked through this entire, we're now gonna look at, cloning a repository and building out a styled, a little bit more interesting. It's still not going to be very, very functional, but it'll be maybe a little bit more interesting in terms of how it looks. And the way we can do that is I'm going to grab this git clone. So here in Windows Subsystem for Linux, I'm going to paste that, which is going to pull that entire folder down. If I look what's in there, and I go to, so there's an end and a start, so you can kind of see the result. But I'm going to cd into the start, and then I'm going to do a code dot, which is going to launch a secondary instance of VS Code, but referencing this new project folder that I pulled down from a GitHub repository. Okay, so here and that is basically what is captured here in this set of instructions. So let's keep following through with this, and you can kind of follow along if you'd like as well. And let's start to build out this application. So we have an index.html already in place that's been pre-created for us. It has a reference to a style sheet, a cascading style sheet, a CSS file that provides styling that we could utilize. It has some really cool looking images, to be honest with you, here within this project that we could potentially plug into our application, and we will, but we'll do it in a dynamic manner. And then, so in our index.html, we're going to sort of follow along with these to do directives. So one of the first things we're going to do is grab the script tag for Vue and paste it in, right? That pulls in the Vue library into our page. Okay. And now what we're going to do is add an index.js. Let me make sure I go back here and save this. There are multiple times I found if I don't save right away, when I try to run the code, I find that it doesn't, it's not updated the way I think it would be or should be, just because I forgot to save. So look for that white circle. As you use VS Code more and more, you'll get used to doing that. Okay, so just like in the previous example, first thing we're going to do is create a Vue app using the Vue.createApp method. Within this create app, it's going to take as a parameter an object that defines our model. One of the methods, or our app, if you will, one of the methods that we're going to have is the data method. The data method is going to return an object which provides us with different properties that we can use for binding in our UIs. So the first one here is product name, cruise to the moon. The second one is product description. And rather than typing this out, I'm going to copy and paste it from the Microsoft Learn module. Okay, so cruise to the moon in our luxurious shuttle. Watch the astronauts working outside the International Space Station. I'm going to add a comma there. And then I can simply put a placeholder in for additional properties later. Okay. So this is our Vue app object. Let me get rid of those extra lines and blank lines. This is our Vue app object that has a data method returning an object with some properties that we are likely going to want to bind to our page. The next thing we do is pull that app in and mount it. And the way we pull the app in is with a script tag, index.html, index.js. And then the way we mount is script mount. And again, we might, this can be whatever ID we have in the page, right? And we don't have anything yet, so we're going to put that here. And then we're going to do a little bit of, kind of styled binding or styled data display. All right, so here we're going to bind on this page product name and product description, which should automatically, update those for display of the values dynamically within our data model. Again, this app doesn't have to be called app. If this was called my app, then I could use my app. Oh gosh, my app like that, right? So this is just looking for an ID that has the same value. I'll leave it at app because that's kind of the idiomatic thing you'll see. So we're now ready to, again, very easily, very quickly, we're now ready to display our page, right? We're now ready to see the Vue application running. Now, I could do what I did before and just launch the index.html page, but looking at VS Code, the fact that it has that extension capability to it, let's leverage that. If I come over here to this icon on the left-hand side, I can navigate in here, and I can search for live server. And it says it can't connect right now, so sometimes that happens. Just give it a couple minutes, come back. Let's try this again. There we go. Live server. Now, right now, I've already installed it or enabled it. But if you haven't yet, all you have to do is click the enable button here. And then different extensions, some extensions require you to do a refresh or a reload, and there will likely be a button there if you need to do that. But this live server, what this extension does is it will launch our application on a specific port, and then this extension watches our source code for changes. And then as changes are made to the source code, it will automatically update the page, and it just makes for a richer developer experience. So instead of me needing to re-navigate or refresh my page every time, I can use this live server to see my code changes reflected immediately within the page. We can use Control-Shift-P if you're on Windows, or Command-Shift-P if you're on a Mac. We can type live server, and that'll show us the commands that are available for that extension. The one we're going to use is open with live server. And we should end up with a message here that server is started at port 5500. It launched the page, which is again on a different screen. So let me move that over. And that is our information, right? That's our product name and our product description. And to see the live server in action, if I go to my code, get rid of that. And if I change this to book a cruise to the moon with a couple of exclamation points, I'm going to save this file. If I switch back to the page, I'll see that immediately updated, right? And that shows you the binding, right? I updated those that information to the back, and then now the updates to the binding that I've done in this case is at development time, right? I made a change and then I saved it, and you could see that change reflected in the page. But that was just because live server is working. In my code, right, I could have logic that also programmatically updates this data value or this model property. And when it does, Vue's watchers will be looking for that change within the execution of the program and can automatically update the display in place. Okay. Again, feel free, if you have any questions, feel free to post those. Any comments, definitely want you to feel like if you have questions that you're able to ask them. So definitely take advantage of that if you have any. All right. So we've seen in a couple of different examples how to stand up, albeit simple, but a Vue app, right? A fully functional Vue app. All right. Let's talk about some additional capabilities that we have available to us. As soon as I get to the right slide, the right screen or application. All right, so now we're going to talk attribute binding. So we've used handlebar syntax here to display data, right? To display it as contents on our page, either within an H2 element or within a div tag. What we're going to talk about now is the ability we have with Vue to bind attributes of our elements, our HTML elements, to properties in the data model as well. We're going to talk about, we're going to use an example of binding the source attribute of an image tag to a property in our data model. And then we're going to look at some of the specialized syntax, semi-specialized syntax that we use to make our styling or our class designations dynamic as well. Okay, So far we've been using the sort of simple handlebars binding, which, excuse me, which works for display of data, and that's great. But there are directives in Vue that provide us capabilities for more sophisticated binding. Some of those directives even allow us to dynamically build out the DOM or document object model based on the underlying data model. So a couple of good examples. There's a directive that allows you to conditionally display an element based on a value within the data model. There's a directive that allows you to take a collection of things in your data model and automatically build out an LI element or list, right, of all of those things dynamically on your page. Now, if I had a collection of 4 things, I could manually build 4 LI tags, but then if I added something new, I'd have to go in and build or add a new LI tag. By using these directives, we're able to encapsulate or wrap a data property in the data model that is a collection type, and then ask Vue to, for everything that's in that collection, give me a list item. And then as things are removed or added to the collection within the data model, the watchers will make sure the displayed list on the page gets updated dynamically as well. So, it makes it for a very, very rich developer experience, right? Easier to code, but it also makes for a very, very rich user experience because we now get updates, automatically. All right. Again, we're not going to have a chance to dig too far into those. Some of those we might have an opportunity to look at them in one of the future sessions coming up on Vue. But our goal today is to build that strong foundation and start ourselves on a path that we can continue to travel down to learn more. All right, so handlebars provide a simple display of that dynamic data. Attribute binding allows us to, dynamically update an attribute on an HTML element. And a good example, and one that I've already mentioned, is the source attribute of an image tag, right? The source attribute is what determines the picture displayed, right? The image displayed on the page. You might have a case where you have an API call. Maybe you are, you have a page that's going to display product details, including an image that shows the product, right? If the user enters a new product name and says search, we can go out via API call to pull the data for that product. And one of the data values for that product we pull could be the image source. We could bind that dynamically, and then all of a sudden, in response to the search, our page updates and shows the product we just searched for shows its image dynamically. That's one of the really cool uses for some of this binding technology. So to do this binding of attributes, we're going to use a core directive defined within Vue called vbind. So that's going to be sort of the foundational one that we begin to focus on. It's going to allow us to, as I mentioned, bind HTML attributes to some data value in the underlying model. And here's what an example looks like. So image vbind : source equals, and then some data model property name. So, typically when we do an image element, we would have img and then just src. And then here we would have a path or a URL that, locates for us the image that we want to have displayed in that tag. In this particular case, we're prefixing that attribute with v-bind : that makes it a Vue dynamic binding. All right, and we'll see an example here in the code in just a bit. Oh, we are running out of time. vbind supports a shorthand version, which is generally considered better practice. So for example, we can do :source or :src. That colon in front signifies that we are that we're doing a Vue binding. And then on changes to those bound data values, the Vue watchers will update for us automatically. We can dynamically bind our classes. So CSS classes are designations that we can apply to our elements to give grouped bundles of styling to them, right? And so we can give that class a name, apply that class to an element, and then all of the styling defined within that class will get applied to the element. We can hard code those things, right? We can write those things into our code, but Vue gives us the ability to bind that class to an object that will dynamically either apply or disable classes. And the way we do it is from our model, we return a sub object that has properties, one of which each represents a class name, and then a value that's either a true or a false. If it's true, that class will be applied. If it's false, it will be removed. And then, as you can imagine, we can update that dynamically throughout our programming logic. We can set some to true, set some to false, and change the way our application looks dynamically. Here's an example. This data method is going to return an object, and one of the elements of that object is a sub object called class object. There's two class names here, centered and active, both set to true. When we bind :class to that object, then if these values are true, centered and active will get applied. If any of these are false, then they'll get removed dynamically from the element. We can also bind our style. So using vbind style or :style, we can set that equal to a style data object, which represents a set of key value pairs. And then that object will get bound automatically and apply styles dynamically. And so the example of that would be something like this. Our data method returns an object, and a sub object captured within that model is something that we give. In this case, we're calling style object. Style object has a set of key value pairs like background color red. And then we can bind that style to the :style property of a div. And then if this, whatever this object represents, we could change it dynamically in our code runtime. That styling would be automatically updated and applied to the element. Okay, so just a couple of things. I know we're running short on time. So a couple of things that I wanted to finish off with. Pardon me. Just to demonstrate this, I'm going to add some new properties here that I'm copying and pasting. Oops. And then I'm going to do a format so that looks nicer. And so we've now added a product image, which is a path to a JPEG. We've added a product image description, and we've added a product image style object. I can then go into my HTML. And I'm going to copy and paste this just in the interest of time, but we'll talk about what we're doing here. I can go into my HTML. I can add this image tag. And now I'm binding using Vue :source to product image to that property or that URL. I'm binding :alt to a description for alternative text if the image can't be displayed. And then I'm binding style to that product image style object here. And so when I save this and I flip back over to my live server, I'll see the image displayed. We see the style applied, which includes border radius. And if I right click and inspect this element, we can see that the source is assets cruise.jpg. Alternative text is the value of that data property, and there's our style, right? But they're all dynamically built from data model properties and bound and refreshed automatically by Vue. Okay. Last thing I want to show is just a quick example of this class binding. So if I bring up my styles.cs and I add just a new class down here called test, and let me make the font weight bold. What I can then do with this test class is in my data model, I can add a product class. And then now I can add whatever classes I want to have. I can call it test and give it a value true. And then I can bind, for example, this div here. I can bind the class property using Vue, right, to this, what did I call it? Product class. Oh, you can't see my screen. Hold on a second. It says I'm still sharing. Let me stop and restart. Are you able to see now? I hope. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out, Mohammed. So let me just take a couple of steps back because I'm not sure what might have gotten missed there. So here in the styles.cs, I have a new class called test that I added, and all it includes is one style property for font weight that I've got set to bold. And then I have, within my object here, I have added a sub-object to my data model called product class. I've included the class name test, and then I've included the Boolean true to indicate I want it added. And then over here, I have bound to the colon class attribute that product class object. And so when I save this, Vue is going to pull that in and automatically make this bold. If I right click and look at the element itself, we can see that it has the class test assigned. If I were to go back into my code, and again, I'm doing this manually in my code, but if logic in my application were to go in and set this property to not false, I mean, not flays, but false, then I would see this get automatically updated dynamically. Now the class has been removed. Okay, my apologies. I know it was a little bit of a whirlwind toward the end there. In terms of kind of wrapping up, please send me the recording. Okay, so somebody was asking about the recording, and Moria posted where the recording can be found, so definitely look for that there. Let's just wrap up by way of summary. What did we cover? We talked core concepts of Vue.js, right? What does it look like to just, build a Vue application in kind of the easiest way possible from the ground up? We built out a couple of simple reactive web apps, and then we looked at attribute, class, and style data binding. Those links that Moria posted, I'm actually going to, because in case folks missed them, I'm going to post them again. One of the links included there is the Microsoft Learn module. Feel free to grab that recording, that Microsoft Learn module, and then there's also a link to the GitHub repository. Pull all that together as you continue to review. And then the last thing is a survey, which Moria will be putting into the chat as well. If you could please fill out that survey using event code 13099, that would be greatly appreciated. That is your opportunity to kind of communicate to us what you like to see, your thoughts. We want to make sure that these sessions are meeting you where you, are and are really providing benefit and value. So definitely take advantage of the opportunity, if you would please, to fill out that survey, because it's just helpful for us to get that info. All right, so before we wrap up, are there any final questions? Thank you, Maria, for posting that. That's the survey link, 13099. Well, if there aren't any final questions, I would strongly encourage you to look out for a couple of upcoming Reactor sessions over the course of the next couple of weeks. You got it. Where can you learn about TypeScript support? Maybe in one of the future sessions here, we can touch on that, Boris. That's a great question. There is there's the ability to link those technologies together because TypeScript is just a superset of JavaScript. Let's talk a little bit more about that, and maybe in the upcoming sessions I can provide some links to kind of illustrate that. But great opportunity for me to be with you. I hope you got a lot out of this. I hope you learned a lot. I had a ton of fun. As always, it is such a pleasure for me to be with you. And definitely take advantage of those upcoming sessions to continue that journey along the Vue route. And really appreciate you being here and wish you all the best. Bye-bye.